If we're treating them like spiritual interns, they're going to feel patronized, they're going to feel underappreciated, and I believe this is going to lead to them disengaging.
What better way to help youth grow than to help them fail safely?
And now for a cultural call-out. We sure don't appreciate that.
Welcome back to Salty Saints. My name is Hayden Holm. This is my brother Tanner. And today we are talking about the youth, specifically when leaders don't let the youth lead. I don't know if this is something that you've seen, but when I was going through the Young Men's program, I served in multiple presidencies, deacons quorum, teachers quorum, and priest quorum. And it felt like in every single presidency I was in, having a title in the presidency meant that I was in charge of assigning prayers, and I was in charge of somebody. My main responsibility was a leader would tell me an activity that we were going to do, and then he asked me if I thought it was a good activity or not, and then I would just have to say yes or no. And
Right.
That was pretty much the totality of my responsibilities. How does that check with your experiences in the church?
Yeah, I think growing up way back when I had a very similar experience. It's like they tell you the announcements in front of everybody, then they tell you to stand up and tell the announcements to everybody.
That's right.
So
That's
it's like,
right.
yeah, which is kind of good practice, but yeah, there's not a lot of like critical, independent thought happening there. And I don't like really fault my individual leaders at that time, because maybe I was just a brain dead teenager, which is very much true, right?
Right.
But at the same time, what should have happened and what didn't happen nearly often enough is that I did not fail. Like there is a safety net of them just like taking over whenever I paused or had a blank stare, like I didn't know what to do. So yeah, that definitely stepping on what should have been my position in leadership at the time and not letting me either take the fall or take the rise and step up to the plate.
I do have to make one adjustment to what I said, my experience. I will say that in addition to all of that, they gave me a binder full of like paper for notes and note taking and stuff like that. So they did do that. So it wasn't just that I was in charge of assigning prayers if the president wasn't there. I also had a binder to take notes. It would have been nice to know how to take notes and what to take notes on, but at least I had the binder there.
You had the binder, which meant you were important. So
that's right. So let me tell you another story here. So Chanel, after we got married, she served in a young women's presidency in one of our earliest wards. And in that presidency, there was a talk at General Conference that basically re-emphasized the importance that leaders let the youth lead. And so she got back. She was jazzed. She was energized. She was like, yes, this is great. Let's let the youth lead out on this. I'm really excited to see what this does. And the leader, the young women's leader at the time, was like, I'm sure that's going to work in other wards, but in our ward, if we don't plan the activities and if we don't do these things, it's not going to get done. Okay. And so trust me, if we don't do it, if we don't take over, it's not going to happen. And so she just kind of shut down the idea right there. And then they just kind of resumed their operations, which meant leaders planning everything, leaders hosting everything, leaders planning activities for kids. Then when the kids show up, leaders reminding them that they're in charge of assigning someone to say the prayer, and then reminding them to give the announcements, and then telling them what the announcements are, and then having the youth repeat the announcements in the activity. That's an experience that I don't think is too foreign to a lot of youth that grew up in Utah. And what are some of the damages that can result from a leadership style like that? So if you're told you're a leader, and then they give you like this Little Tykes, my first time leading experience, that's completely nerfed, has all the pads, is very, very kid friendly.
yeah, well, I mean, to that, there are tons of damages that can come from that. But what really happens is that like anything, you don't end up cultivating a testimony of your own potential as a leader, right? And I feel like that happens. This is mostly in Utah, right? But in these bigger wards, like that happens all the time where they're kind of infantilized, and just kind of shuffled from one class to the next and not really, given a chance to fail, to choose things that might be outside the box, and try to experiment with different leadership styles or, opportunities in the church. So, and to be fair, the youth do not make it easy, right? I was on a committee recently, like last year, when we were talking about family history and temple work. And so I was on the Elders Quorum side. We had a Relief Society presidency member there, and then we had the youth representation there. I remember asking what they thought, if they had any ideas or anything they'd like to contribute. And we sat there for like 2-3 minutes in silence, until the Relief Society president just couldn't handle it anymore. She's like, I can't, I have to say something. So she started suggesting things, and that's all the youth need is like a lifeline. As soon as you put it into a yes or no question, where they just give it a thumbs up or thumbs down. They're like, oh yeah, let's do that. Or no, let's not do that. You can get 2 words out of them. Usually it's yes or no. Those are your options, right? So you have to be very careful when dealing with youth to avoid binary questions. That's like that would be my first tip to anyone who's trying to push their youth into thinking more about their role and taking action, is avoid those binary questions, because those are just real easy ways to switch off your brain and to push, kick things down the road for them. But yeah, sure. I mean, if you boil it all down to that, that's basically what leadership did when we were youth. Some leadership, we have great leaders in other aspects and other times in our life, but in that teacher priest, there was age, there was a couple leaders there who just give you a list of yes no questions, and then you just approved or disapproved, and that's all they really need. And if you disapprove the wrong one, they would tell you, and then you would approve it. So
right.
That's and you grow up, and then you just don't know what to think, because you've been telling someone, someone's been telling you what to think the entire time. So it's like, well, I don't know how to lead because there's no one here to tell me how to lead. So you're mentally stunted in your leadership. Now that the church does a great job in other ways, like encouraging, calling youth speakers and things like that, but which you actually get up in front and practice public speaking. Like they help a lot. Like the actual doctrine and structure of the church is poised to develop really well-rounded youth into great adults. But the backsliding into the comfort of just letting them escape the responsibility is happening all too often.
Right. Well, I think it comes from a deep-seated fear that a lot of leaders carry, that the activities have to happen. I don't know what it is about having activities that leads leaders to just lose their minds and lose that vision, where they're like, we have to have the activities. There's no way we can't just not have an activity. Are you mad? But what you lose in that, if you take over just one time, if you just take over and drive the car while they're supposed to be steering, then they're going to learn, I don't have to drive at all. Like, you're telling them, you're not really needed. I'm sorry, you're not really needed here, okay? I'm going to steer, and you can just push the gas. Actually, let me just get my foot on there. There you go. See, isn't that great? Oh, and I'll get the foot on the brake, too. And actually, if you can just sit in the passenger seat, see, look, now we're all safe and happy. Isn't this great?
Speed over.
We are terrified to let our youth lead, and I don't understand why. And maybe this is a question to put out to the comments. Why are we so afraid to let the youth lead? Why do we kowtow to the activities calendar so often? I mean, I think it would be great just to say, all right, here are your responsibilities, and then treating them like they're your coworkers and saying, all right, you let us know how we can help you. We're going to guide you. We're going to encourage you. And then you completely step off. I think you might have to miss a couple activities. I think you might have to experience some failures until they realize, oh crap, I'm actually in the driver's seat on this one. Because they haven't seen it done before, in my experience. In a lot of wards, they have not seen this done before. And I think it goes back to what I was talking about in the last episode too. I don't think a lot of leaders understand what this looks like either. So I think a lot of leaders just default onto what happened when they were kids. And just like, okay, now that I'm a leader, I have to make sure that activities happen. And that's my goal. And it shifts the focus away from the youth and towards your calendar, where it's like, I am now riveted on these activities and making sure that they are great activities that the kids love and they are the best activities. I don't know why I'm slipping into Trump on this one, but it's just, you're completely missed the mark if you just focus on activities and not people. It reminds me of that Preach My Gospel lesson where they say, teach people, not lessons. We need to be like, we have to be raising leaders, not having activities. You know, there's this quote by Goethe, the big philosopher, German philosopher Goethe. He says, if you treat an individual as he is, he will remain how he is. But if you treat him as if he were what he ought to be and could be, he will become what he ought to be and could be. So if you put expectations on the youth and then treat them as an equal, as a co-worker with you in the work of salvation, I think they will rise to your expectations. But if your expectations are down here onto, you're going to assign someone to say the prayer then they will rise to that expectation too and say, okay, my whole job is just to assign somebody to say the prayer. That's what being a leader is. But I cut you off. You were going to say something. Go ahead.
Well, I think so. I have my hypothesis as an answer to this question of why we focus on activities and why we handicap and, put training wheels and all the leadership of the youth. I think is that we are terrified of them failing, and then we're terrified of them not showing up again. Right. I think we're really scared that because, participating in the church is a voluntary system. Right. And they may not have the testimony they need to understand that they need to continue to show up and that it's okay to fail. Right. So I think there's a deep-seated fear that they can't have a bad experience at church or else they won't come back. And, failing would qualify in most people's minds as a bad experience, but it's not. It's a helpful experience, It's a necessary one. If you're going to, utilize the atonement at all in your life and actually progress as a human, you have to fail. I feel like what better way to help youth grow than to help them fail safely, in an environment where people care about them and can forgive them easily, and they can move on and practice failing. Right. So I think that leaders are just terrified. Like if we give them responsibility and they fall short, they're going to hate us forever and they'll never come back. Which that goes into parenting too. A lot of people,
it's like a self-fulfilling prophecy. Too. They're trying to avoid that, and in trying to avoid it, they end up causing it. Because I would compare 100%. It to like being an intern. Like in the corporate world, after college, you're poor, you're starving, and you're like, okay, I got to go get an internship. And a lot of them are unpaid. I had to fight for my $10 an hour in my internship. And they give you really, really tedious, menial labor that's very, very low level with the idea that you have to earn your way up in this organization. And so I remember they didn't even call me by my name when I was an intern. They just called me intern. They literally just said, hey, intern, come here, come do this, And so did I want to work for that company afterward? No, absolutely not. Like the group that I was, my team that I was supposed to be a part of, they would give me these really low-level projects to work on that didn't really have any kind of impact. And then they would have this whole chat channel outside of my chat channel that I was on. Like, so there were times where like they would each chat to each other like, hey, let's go out to lunch. Then like we're all in the same room. It's just us. All at once, they get up and they leave and they all go out to lunch together. And I'm just sitting there just like, bye guys, feeling like a goober, because I'm not involved in those conversations. So if we're treating youth like spiritual interns, they're going to feel patronized. They're going to feel underappreciated. And I believe this is going to lead to them disengaging. They're going to be like, okay, I don't need daycare. I don't need this whole spiritual daycare anymore. I'm done. I'm an adult. I'm getting older. Give them actual responsibility is what the brethren have been saying. And we have a hard time offloading that from our shoulders and saying, here you go. Let's care for some souls together now. And let's go out there and bring in these lost souls in a way that adults can't. Adults have such a hard time meeting youth where they're at and bringing them into church. But a youth to youth interaction, that's a completely different dynamic. Like, they speak the same language, they understand the culture the same way. It's like, that's the real powerhouse of the church right there. I mean, an adult trying to do that is like that meme, like, hello, fellow children, you know, like that guy comes in and he's like,
guy with a skateboard.
That's right. Hello, fellow skaters. And so that's how adults come off to the youth, you know? And so if you let them lead, then they will actually, I think they will take it, you know? But I think a lot of people just don't know what it looks like. The other piece that I wanted to talk about real quick, this reminds me of the Stripling Warriors, okay? So Stripling Warriors, they were led by Helaman. The Lamanite army was chasing them. And they were like, okay, they were bait. And eventually they stopped. And so did Helaman at that point turn around and say, all right, well, I got to make this decision now. We have to have this activity of whether or not to just keep running. We'll have a running activity or a fighting activity with these Lamanites, you know? Instead, he turned back to the Lamanites, to the Stripling Warriors, and he was just like, all right, we might be walking into death, maybe not. And then he turned it over to them. What do you want to do? And he said, I will follow you. If you want to go face them, I'll follow you, even if it's a trap, because it could very well be a trap. And they were like, let's do this. And he followed them, you know, and it was like him following their lead is what I think gave them the self-confidence that they needed in finding their own personal revelation and trusting that personal revelation so that their faith was strong enough to trust in the promises of their mothers, which ultimately delivered them from the Lamanites. So,
absolutely. Yeah, it activated them.
Right. And so I loved your idea of like letting them lead while there's a window for that. Like the time to take the training wheels off the bike isn't after they leave the home. It's while you're still around there, so that if they're making mistakes, you're there to give some correction, you know, and to offer that steady support. Yeah. But the training wheels should come off in the youth program. You shouldn't be waiting to take those training wheels off at all. Like, rip those things off and let them ride, let them fail.
100%. I remember being terrified because, I mean, like you said, you give them all the respect for the calling, but none of the responsibility. Is just very patronizing, you know?
Yeah.
But I remember like the first time I actually like really dropped the ball in a calling and being just petrified. And then going and explaining to my leaders at that time that I dropped the ball, and they're like, okay, yeah, let's try not to do that again. Like, that was it. You know?
That's it?
Like,
yeah.
Like, the teenagers are terrified of failure. Like, that's, I mean, they're entirely insecure because they don't know who they are yet. So help them face that fear and show them that on the other end of that, like, it's totally fine. Like, nobody really cares if you fail. We'll fix it. There's no irreparable damage here. So yeah, help them through that fear by letting them do that and then showing them that it's okay.
Right. And give them training, you know, train them up and pull from the scriptures and show them these examples and help them to learn how to catch fish for themselves while they're still at home. This is from President Eyring. Really relevant quote. He says, what will matter most is what they learn from you about who they really are and what they can really become. My guess is they won't learn it so much from lectures. They will get it from feelings of who you are and who you think they are and what you think they might become. So the way that you treat the youth in these programs is actually going to have an impact on their future engagement with the church. So if our goal, we got to stop viewing them as youth and we have to start viewing them as the future leadership of the church and start treating them that way. And I think that will help them to engage. If they can see that you actually believe that they are leaders, I think they'll rise to it. Call me crazy, but I think the brethren are saying that too. So there's
100%.
Before we wrap up, there is one video that I want to show from Elder Bednar, who just drops some wisdom.
The adults, from a very well-intentioned motive and the sincerest of purposes, typically get in, take over, and do not allow the young people to do anything. And so the adult advisors run the program so that the program will be effective. And to the degree that the adults run it, it is not effective. I think we ought to have more programs running less well with people learning more. And so it becomes not a matter of you primarily just talking and telling and explaining. It really becomes a matter of inviting the young people to act. So these young people can't do that without some direction. So you have to be there, but you got to get out of the way. You have to provide direction without taking over. And that's not easy to do. Let them act. They will make some mistakes, and that's a part of the learning. Somebody took a chance on you, and on you, and on you, and on me. I just invite you to give that same chance to the youth.
Our takeaway in the age of home-centered church is don't focus on the program, focus on the youth. And allow them to lead, give them the expectation to lead. The other piece is parents. I think this is a big thing for parents. Like, if your child is called into a presidency, sit them down and walk through their responsibilities with them. And if their leaders are not holding them accountable for their responsibilities, you can. And you can remind your youth to send out messages to these leaders saying, hey, I'm supposed to be leading this. I'm supposed to be planning this. I appreciate you trying to do this, but I'm going to be moving forward with this, according to my personal revelation. I don't know a single leader who would get a text like that and say, like, oh, this is terrible. No, I'm not going to do it. I think the leaders would be all about that. They'd be like, oh my gosh, this kid's taking initiative. Let's do that. So I would say in the age of home-centered church, parents encourage those children to get out there, fulfill their responsibilities and magnify their callings and help them learn that way. That's all you can do at home. Leaders, get out of the way of the kids. Stop feeling like you have to take over everything, is what I would say. Well, what would you say? In the age of home-centered church, what's the takeaway?
Yeah, I think you nailed it. I think that parents can also let the leaders know to, let their children take responsibility. Say, hey, don't play softball with them. Let's let them take charge. And if they fail, let them fail. You have my full permission as a parent to let my kid go out there and fail. I think that'd be a good thing to do, because I know that some leaders are terrified of hurting the parents' feelings by letting their kid fail. So we think everyone needs to take their hands off a little bit, step back, and just watch the miracle unfold. Right, watch the youth rise to the occasion.